Getting started with OpenAPI and Postman, welcome to the session. My name is Joyce. I'm the head of developer relations at Postman, and I'm joining you from San Francisco. If you want to follow me, go ahead and ask questions at Petunia Gray on Twitter. Arnaud, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so hello everyone, I'm Arnaud. I'm technical OpenAPI lead at Postman. You may also know me as the API handyman, and that's my Twitter handle. And I wrote a book about the API design called The Design of Web APIs.
I'm so excited you're here. Arnaud, you and me, we're on the same team, but I seldomly get to dive so deeply into OpenAPI. And even preparing for the session, I've already learned so much. So very glad you're here with us. Arnaud is indeed an industry expert on OpenAPI and goes by API handyman in the interwebs. So this is an introductory session. If you've never worked with OpenAPI before, or you're just getting started and you want to know a little bit more, we will be introducing what is OpenAPI, and then also go over some better practices, specifically reusable components. That's pretty neat. And then we'll say how you can use OpenAPI in Postman. We'll be taking a look at documentation tests, a lot of the benefits that people are looking at OpenAPI for. We'll be tactically looking at that. But again, this is an introductory session. So if you're looking for more deep advanced content, either ask your questions in the Q&A, or we do have some follow-up sessions coming up soon. And then we'll point you to some resources and have a few minutes for live Q&A at the very end. So hopefully when you registered for this session, you were able to review the learning objectives. We'll be, again, introducing OpenAPI, the specification format. We'll also be talking about an API-first approach to design and development, talk about reusable components, and then get tactical in Postman to see tactically what does that look like, what does that feel like. So this is a follow-along session. And right off the bat, so we know how to tailor this, because the people who showed up right now, it's live, so we can tailor this a little bit to you. We do have a poll. So in your Zoom interface, I'm about to launch a poll. Hold on one second. I think I need to, if somebody in the, how do I launch it again? Relaunch poll, there we go. All right, so I just popped a poll question. Which specification do you use? Go ahead and chime in there. We just want to gauge the audience to see. Oh gosh, thank you very much for participating and answering. The answers are coming in fast and furious.
Yeah.
Oh, is this a trick question, Arnaud? Okay, so I'll just end the poll right now. Get your answers in right now. Do you use Swagger, OpenAPI, both, or none? So I will share the results. It looks like the winner is OpenAPI with 36%, then Swagger with 27%, 14% are using both formats, and then 24% are none. So that's great. There's people who aren't even using a specification yet, and this is their chance to get their feet wet. Amazing. Thank you very much for sharing that. And let's go on to API first. So we're talking about OpenAPI as an introduction, and people use OpenAPI for a few different aspects. Sometimes they're using it for design, sometimes they're using it for documentation. But today we're going to be talking about OpenAPI as a design first tool. So this is the API producer lifecycle. You might have seen it before in some of our other space camps, but this is what an API producer goes through. They design and mock, they debug and test, they document, monitor, publish, and deploy. And so we're starting off using OpenAPI at the design phase, the very first phase of the lifecycle, but we'll also see how to use OpenAPI throughout the entire API lifecycle. So that's what we mean when we say API first. Just a quick primer. Again, we have whole courses dedicated to that, but that's just the context that we're setting right now. Oh my gosh. Arnaud, are you ready?
I am.
Okay.
It's my turn.
So everyone at home who wants to follow along, stretch out your fingers because we're about to get tactical with OpenAPI. And then if somebody wouldn't mind dropping a link to the workspace, we do have all the materials in our Space Camp workspace for all of our space camps. But Arnaud, you've done a really good job of of creating learning materials that's going to let us follow through with all of this. So hopefully there's a link to the Spacecamp workspace. Take a look at that. And then Arnaud, if you want to go ahead and share your screen.
Okay, let's go. This one. Yeah. Okay. Now that you say all along, I regret to not have a little bell, because when I was a kid, I was listening to records, LPs, telling stories. And when you had to turn the page of the book that goes with the record, there was a cute sound telling you, hey, you have to turn the page. So
Ding.
I wish I could do that. Oh,
Ding,
you can
ding.
go to the next version of the API. Okay, yeah, but we are not here to talk about my childhood memories. We are here to talk about the OpenAPI specification. As you might have guessed with the introduction poll, the OpenAPI specification was formerly known as the Swagger specification. I'm happy to see there are more people than using the OpenAPI specification than the Swagger one, but at least that means you are using a machine-readable API description format that can be used for a wide range of usage. And
before
yes.
you get started, before you go further along, let's just, we did drop a link to this workspace in the chat. On the left sidebar, you'll see APIs. And if you select the APIs option, look for getting started with OpenAPI and Postman. And that's what we're looking at right now, right?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, so the OpenAPI specification is a machine-readable description format, but it's also human-readable. You can use it at the design time. That's what we'll use today. And but you can also generate it from your code. You can generate it at runtime. You can generate it by scanning your logs and do many different things with it. It's really important to take advantage of this format. But heads up, before diving into how works the OpenAPI specification, you have to think a little bit about what your API is supposed to do, because the OpenAPI specification's job is just to describe that your API has a get/this and a post/that. That's all. Unfortunately, get/this and post/that does not mean many things for many people. So before diving into that, you need to talk about the needs of your API. And so I created the first version of our API, which contains nothing except a collection documentation to show you what I mean by working on needs. So the idea is really thinking with the stakeholders, the subject matter experts, about what the API is supposed to do, what are the features it will provide to whom, and what these people, these consumers, people and applications, will be able to do. To work on that, I personally use a very simple method called the API called Canva. So you define who does what. You then decompose those use case in several actions. And on each of them, you identify the goal. Doing that for all the users, all what they can do, you will be able to identify all possible goals that your API needs to fulfill. You will refine this list of goals that will give you the list of operations. And once you have that, you can start thinking about going into the get/this and the post/that. That's really important to do that first analysis in natural language, because it will allow you to include everyone in the discussion. So once you have your goals, you can extract your REST resources, and that's when we will start to use actually the OpenAPI specification. So during this session, I will rebuild the API you have there, so you can afterwards, you will be able to go through all the steps. In each one, I will take this one. You can go to the definition tab. You will see the actual steps, and I have put comments when I have added elements to explain what is happening. So you'll be able to have all those information afterwards.
So interesting. So you've created several versions in your API. And this is just almost like cheat sheets. And if you're very, very impatient, you can skip to the end to see where we're going. But it's almost like a cooking show where you've added the eggs and now like look at it at this point. And now you've cooked the eggs. Now look at it at this point. So right now we're under a version and under the definition tab. And you can see the specification at certain points in time. And right now you're going to be looking at it because you can't fork the version to your own personal workspace, but this is going to be a good guide that shows you where you want to be at a certain point in this workflow that we're going through.
Yeah. And we talk about using the OpenAPI specification to do other stuff. The first one is generating human readable documentation like this one. Okay, the specification is quite empty, so there's not much, but feel free to browse through the different versions. Okay, so now I will switch to another workspace that I share with Joyce, and I will create an API. So it's a dummy API example, the postmanaut directory.
So if you're following along, now's where you can actually be in your own workspace. You can create a brand new API exactly like Arnaud's doing.
Yeah. I will use the OpenAPI 3.0 version. You can use also other version 3.1. I will stick to 3.0 because that is the version that is supported by most of the tooling. The 3.1 start to be adopted by tooling, but it's not yet available everywhere. So creating the API. Okay. So I have a version of my API, the first version. I go to the definition. I remove the pre-generated document, and I start from scratch. So I start by describing the document. So the first things I do is telling, oh, this is an OpenAPI 3.0.3 document. That's the latest version of 3.0. That way, parsers will be able to understand what's going on. Then I give a few information about the API itself, such as its name, which is called title. It's really important to define a good name for your API because if people are able to understand what your API does by just looking at the name, that's really good. And also choosing the right name will help you to define the frame of what does your API. I can put a description just to show you. I will take this one. So every time you will see a description property in the OpenAPI specification, it's a Markdown compatible description field. You will see what happened with this one. So the description is used to tell a little bit more about what your API does. And then we have the version of the API. It's a string. You can put whatever you want in it. I use semantic versioning usually, but you can use, I think it's Stripe who's using dates. Some people are using name. So it's up to you to choose what suits your needs. Okay. One last information about the API. It's usually an API, all the operations and resources of an API will share a common base path. In Swagger 2, there was a base path property. It has been removed in OpenAPI 3, but now you can use not URL, but servers. And
when
each server
autocomplete is trying to help you too.
Yeah, as a URL, and you can put relative or complete URL. So we'll put a relative one, postmanaut directory /v1, because I like to put the major version number in the base path. It's really important to define that base path because usually when you deploy your API on an API gateway, you need to be sure that all APIs have a distinct base path. Let's call it base path. And yeah, and my document is not yet valid. I need to add an empty path property. Basically, I describe the first step of the API, of the OpenAPI document. So if you have go to documentation here, you see. So you see the markdown description here. There is an image, a bold text, a link, and the base path. But nobody will use my API as there is no operation in it. So I need to add one. So I will add the search postmanaut operation. I pick that one from my API goal Canva. So postmanaut is, oh, there is a poll for that. I'm on the team plural for resources that represent list. But which team are you? Postmanaut or postmanaut?
Okay,
postmanaut
so
with an S or postmanaut with an S?
So it's a slightly different. How do you represent a list of resources? It should be up on your screen now. What is proper, or what do you do? It doesn't need to be proper, but what do you do? Is it /resource, /resources, or /search resources?
Yeah. And tips, there is a trap.
Don't tell people there's a trap. Okay, so get your answer in, and I'm going to end the poll in 3, 2, 1. Okay, and it looks like 62% say /resources is correct, or what they use, and then followed by 33% for /resource and a very, very low 5% for search resources.
Yeah, so basically the first two options are valid. It's just a question of choice, what you're used to do. The last option is not really good because you are actually indicating the type of action you are doing in your resource. The type of action will be defined by the HTTP method you will use. If I can type. So that way, get postmanaut or get postmanauts, because I am team plural, says I want to list postmanauts and hopefully search them. Okay, so you see you have the resource, then the HTTP method. I have to provide a summary, which is a short description of the operation. So it's search for postmanauts. I can provide a longer description if I want. I will not do it. So you can use Markdown. I need to return some data. So I had a list of responses, which will for now contain one element, 200, which is the response that will be returned when everything is okay, because 200 is the HTTP status telling that everything is okay. I need to provide it a description. So found postman notes. And I need to describe what will be the content of the response, if there are any. So content. When you describe a content, it can have several data types. So I will use application/JSON. But if I want, I can also add text/CSV or whatever. This content needs to be described. So the data will be described using a schema. The schema we will describe here is actually, it's done with another spec, which is called JSON schema, that you can use in standalone way. It's also used in other formats, such as the async API. The version of JSON schema used in OpenAPI 3.0 is an early version, so I think it's draft 0, and it's an slightly adapted version for the OpenAPI specification. But basically, if you know JSON schema, you shouldn't be lost. So when you define a schema, you can provide the type of the data. we could return an array, which I do not recommend because an array is not extensible. So we will return an object that contains a property which is named data, which is of type array. That way, if I want to provide metadata such as pagination or whatever, I can put them beside the data property. If I return directly an array, I can't. And this array will contain some items that I have to describe using a schema. So it will be objects that contain some properties, like, for instance, an ID of type string and a name of type string. So let's look at how it goes in the documentation tab. And now I have search for postmanaut operation with the full path, which contains the resource path and the base path. And when everything is okay, I will get an object that contains data property, which is for each element, you will have an ID and a name. Using the OpenAPI spec, you can describe more precisely your data. So I will just copy paste a longer version. Here it is.
Arnaud,
yeah.
So the OpenAPI is a schema, and you're also using JSON schema within your OpenAPI schema. Can you tell us how those two play along again?
So basically, the OpenAPI specification did not reinvent the wheel. It is reusing another spec, the JSON schema. So every time you will need to describe data in OpenAPI, you will use JSON schema to do that. That's how it works. So here I have added a more complete description. I will go through a few examples. For instance, I indicate here that the data array can contain 0 elements with min items. I say also that for a postmanaut, I added, you can define title for each element of your schema. You can say what are the required properties. So here we have ID, name, and registration date. For a string, you can tell its minimum and maximum length. You can also use format. For instance, registration date is an ISO 8601 date, year, month, day, without time. If you can avoid time in your date, do it because it's complicated to manage time zone. You can define enumerations, and you can also define the range of possible value for integers. And you can see all that in a more human-friendly way in the documentation. You see, it's required. You have all the other information, the enumeration. But we are looking for postmanauts, not just having the list. So we need a parameter. So we will add parameters with a name. We will be able to filter on name. This parameter is located in the query. So that means you will have something like that, name, whatever. So you don't have to put them in the resource path. Description, you can add a description, partial or complete name, for instance. And you need to define the data format of this property. And so you use a JSON schema. So schema type string. And that's it. So if I go back here, I have the query param that appear. Oh yeah, important thing. It's optional to state it, but I will say it that way. You can state that a parameter is required or not. That's cool. What next? So now we'll talk about errors. The question is, what is the HTTP status to return when there is no postmanaut found?
Oh, okay. It's time for everyone to chime in. We have which HTTP status should return when no postmanaut is found? Is it 200 okay or 404 not found? You're looking, so you're searching for a postmanaut and they're not found. Okay, so ending the poll in 3, 2, 1. And it looks like the majority, 82% says 404 not found, 18% says 200 okay. What's the answer?
So unfortunately, it's 200 okay, which is the right answer, because when you are looking, when you are searching for elements inside the list and you don't find any elements, you actually must return an empty list with a 200 okay. The 404 not found must only be used when the path here is not found. So if we were, and we see that maybe reading a specific postmanaut with a postmanaut ID here, yes, we would return a 404, but not in that case. So that means you can state that empty list returns returned if no one found.
You really tricked everyone with that one.
Yeah, and but that's not the only possible error. There are two errors that you will always get in your APIs. The first one is the 401, when you make your API call without providing an API key or an access token. So description, missing API key. And how do you describe error? Just like the 200, there is some content, which is in application/JSON. Obviously, you could return just a 401 without any content, but it's really important to provide useful error feedback to the consumer so they may solve the problem. The 401 is quite obvious, but still, we can say you do not provide the API key in the X API key header, for instance. So let's do that. Schema, and I will copy paste a complete error schema from here. It's here, yes. Okay. So now when the API key is not provided, I will return a 401, which returns a list of errors. That way I'm extensible. I can provide many errors, so I can point to many problems in one shot. And for each error, we'll add a code, a message, and possibly where the problem is located. So for instance, in our case, we can say, hey, it's in the header, the X API key is missing. The other error you will always get is the 500. I will add it on top of it, 500. So basically, this error happens when something unexpected happens. I could copy paste the schema from the 401 to the 500, but that's really not a good idea for consistency. So I will define a reusable schema to avoid that.
This is my favorite part. Reusable schemas, amazing.
Yeah. There are many reusable components in OpenAPI. So the first one you will use are schemas, and I will describe an errors schema, and I will just take it from here. And put it there. Just need to fix the indentation. Should be okay. And so now instead of describing the word schema, JSON schema, I can use a reference to the schema I have defined. It's $ref, And the value expected by $ref is a JSON pointer, which describes a path in the document. So dash is the document. And when I go into components /schemas/errors. And obviously, I can do the same here. That way, the 500 and the 401 use the same schema. So if I modify it in this place, every error using it will be modified. And as you can see, if we look at the 401, the description has not changed. So that means you can make some modification in your OpenAPI document that are not related to the contract itself, but just to optimize your OpenAPI document.
Yeah, the reusable components, it follows the same, I mean, it has the same benefits as variables. You know, you're keeping code dry, you do not repeat yourself. You can update and cascade all of your error schema updates, or if there's an error, you could just update it in one spot. Amazing.
Yeah.
And it keeps it more readable too. So
because when you look at that on 500, 400, you understand what is happening. It's more easy to read. And we have reached 45. So maybe you can switch to the Postman.
Actually, go ahead and take a few more minutes just to get us to the final. Are you at the final point?
The final point is just the next one, not the final because we knew it was too long, but the final we knew it was possible to achieve is just the next one. So the 401 and the 500 error responses, you will always need them on all of your operations. So if I recreate a new operation, I may introduce inconsistency just in the description. By the way, it's not a big deal, but it's still inconsistency. So in order to lessen the risk of inconsistency, you can define reusable responses. So I will define one for the 500. And so it goes again into the components section. And I will add responses. I will define unexpected error. And I just put the content of my error. And Joyce, do you know how can I use the error I just defined?
$ref?
Yeah. I just have to use a $ref to not component schemas, but component responses, unexpected errors.
Can you use a ref within a ref?
Yeah. For instance, I can define what, a code, error code, which is of type string. And in my errors, the code here is $ref components, not errors, but error code. So you can define schemas that are composed of schemas and then use them in your responses. And also you can define reusable parameters, reusable headers. There are many reusable components. And it's really important to take advantage of them. It will make your document more easy to read, more easy to maintain, and it will avoid introduce inconsistency in your documentation and in your interface contract.
So clean.
Yeah. To switch to the next step, we can create a new version of the API based on that one. So it's here. Create a version. Let's call it final. And we will, even if we will not keep them, we'll copy the existing schema. So what you see here. And as you can see, the definition, you will trust me, is the exact same as the previous one. I will just take the last one containing 2 new operations and more reusable stuff and put it there. So Joyce will be able to show us a few things, especially how Postman can use and how you can use the OpenAPI specification after the design.
And that's nice. So you just created a version and you chose to carry over the schema because that's all you have right now, just carry over the schema. And you said this at the very beginning, you could follow semantic versioning and call that like 1.1, but you can also call it a human readable, like final. This is the final version. Arnaud's trying to convey to me that this is the version that I should be working from.
Yeah, and which is different from the version of the contract.
Yeah.
That's really interesting to have this possibility.
Are you ready for me?
Yeah.
Okay, let me go ahead and share my screen. And I'm in the same team workspace that Arnaud has been working in. So I've been following along breathlessly on my own version. And we're in a team workspace, so you can't see what's going on. But hopefully, if you've gotten this far, then this is, let me just refresh my tab. Your workspace at home, if you're following along, should look very similar. So again, I'm under the APIs tab, under postmanaut directory. And this is the one that we started with, but I know Arnaud told me this is the final version. So this is the one that I should be working off of. And if I select that version, I hope my cat's not sleeping on my Wi-Fi router. It makes my internet slow. And then I'll tab over to definition. Let me try again. I bet my cat is on the, okay. So this is the final version, the final cooked recipe. I can take a look at your refs. I could take a look at your reusable components and all of your responses, all of that kind of stuff. Okay, so in the interest of time, I will point to a lot of people, you were talking about versioning. A lot of people ask about version control, source control, right? So I am actually auth in. If you want to connect, you could see if there's a few different options there. Oh gosh. My cat, I wish my cat would get off that. Let me just hit back. Okay, so if you are authenticated into GitHub, for example, because I pulled GitHub, you can connect your repository, and then you would be able to take Git-like actions from the API right here to GitHub. So you can either commit and push as you're editing in Postman up to GitHub, or whatever remote you choose. And then you can also pull if somebody's updating that spec file in GitHub, or again, your Git remote.
So that means I can work on other tools and share it with you who is working on Postman. So that's really interesting.
And a lot of teams have, like, you pick whichever tool you want to use. And this is a way that you can collaborate with other people without saying like, no, you have to be in here. You have to be a part of my team, that kind of thing. Okay, so I'm going to generate a collection. I had trouble authorizing there, so I have a little toast at the very bottom. But I'm going to be generating a collection, and I do think it's worth spending time. We have the contract. OpenAPI is our contract with our potential consumers, with developers, anyone who's going to be going off this contract. But there's a lot of things that you can generate from that contract. So let's just create a test suite. In this part, I think a lot of people gloss over it, and I typically gloss over it, but I think it's worth mentioning. I can create an association with this OpenAPI file. I can say, in this case, I'm going to click test because I'm going to create a test suite, but I can also create a monitor from the OpenAPI file. I can create mock servers from the OpenAPI file, and I can create documentation. And all this selection of the radio button is an association. Sometimes you generate additional things like a monitor and a mock server, but I'm categorizing it here, and we'll see what that looks like a little bit later on. So I'm going to generate the collection. If I'm having internet connectivity issues, Arnaud, I'm going to talk you through this next part. Okay, so we just saw a toast that we just had this connected. And if we go under the collections tab, you can see here's the collection that was generated from the OpenAPI file. And depending on how you wrote your OpenAPI specification, you might have to fiddle with the preferences of, I want to be following these kind of tags or these kind of paths. But this is what mine looks like now. And in fact, I can see this endpoint. to read a postmanaut, delete a postmanaut with the ID using a path parameter, and then to search postmanauts. Okay, so remember, this is the endpoint, and then this is the human readable name describing what this request is doing. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a closer look. So I'm hovering over the variable called base URL, and Postman's telling me that there's a collection level variable that is going to /postmanaut -directory /v1. So if I go back to the previous tab where I was looking at my spec, remember that servers section right at the top says there's a couple different URLs that you could be using. I might be using this base URL. I might, I didn't select set up a mock server, but I might have some sort of mock cloud endpoint, Postman cloud endpoint, or I might be running this on localhost. So let's go ahead and I'm going to show you something that I'm really excited about. It's server-side code gen. In the chat, if you've tried this before, let me know. So I'll go back to my collection. And a lot of people know that you can fiddle with the requests on this side and you can hit send. Right now, it's not going to return anything because it's going to like a semi-complete base URL. But once I have my request working the way I want it to, this code icon means that I can generate different code snippets to replicate that API call. That's client-side code gen, but let's take a look at server-side code gen. Again, let's go back to our API. And I have my OpenAPI specification. I'm going to go to the same code generation icon. And this time, instead of front-end frameworks, I have back-end languages and frameworks. And I think this, I'll do Node because I have it set up on my machine. If you have Node installed on your machine, you can follow along with this part too. It's kind of rad. So I'm going to select Node as my backend framework, Node Express. And the very first time I generate this client-side code, I will not check this because I want to generate all of the boilerplate. But the next time, if Arnaud comes through and adds more endpoints, next time I can click this and only generate the routes and interfaces. So it's not the whole code base. So I'm going to leave that unchecked because it's the first time I'm doing it and generate that code. Okay, so Postman has downloaded this zipped file. Let me go to my downloads folder. Gosh, how do I unzip? So I'm on a Windows machine, so I need to unzip all of this. Okay, so I'm here in my downloads folder, and I have a couple directories with routes and services, package.json, which is normal for Node, and then a README, et cetera, et cetera. Let's take a look at this in code. What did Postman just download to my machine? What was it called? Postmanaut. Somebody asked, what is Postmanaut? It's our name for people that work at Postman. Okay, so I'm going to go in here and I'm going to open up in my text editor. So you can see, again, here's the directories, here's the README. Let's go ahead and run this project. I'm really trusting Postman here, but let's go ahead and install our dependencies. And then the next thing we'll want to do is run the application. Okay, so now there's an Express server running on localhost port 3000. Okay, so let's go to Postman. And go back to our first request, read a postmanaut. Right now, it's subbing in the preferred URL that Arnaud wrote in the OpenAPI file, but we actually want it to go to, do you remember the location?
It was on port 3000, localhost.
Okay, so let's go to variables because it was reading from a collection variable. And let's save that just in case, but let's just say base URL is going to be port 3000, localhost, and save. Now, when we go back to here, do we think this will work? Will this work?
Finger crossed.
I don't know. Oh no, what happened? Okay, somebody help me debug this. It's going to localhost port 3000.
Ah, you don't have SSL. HTTPS. You need to put it on HTTP.
Ah, okay. So let's go back to edit. And I'll reset all. So we're reading in, save. Try it again. Okay, so what is this? This kind of looks the same, but it looks like placeholders for the data type. So if you go back to VS Code, I glossed over what this looks like in Postman or in VS Code, but you can see here's routes. You know, this is auto-generated from Postman. Here's our routes, and here's our services. So if I go over to the postmanauts.js services file, I can see here's my get postmanauts, and here's a placeholder for implementing my business logic. I'm going to hard code these, and this is what I'm sending back from my local server, but in the future, when I'm actually making queries to my database or whatever data store I have, when I'm actually creating records, retrieving records, and then passing it through here, this is what I already have all the scaffolding set up. Here's the precise response that we just returned. So if I wanted to, I can update this and say, instead of ID, I want this to return like a string. I would have to save my changes and then reload my application so that Postman returns whatever hard-coded or dynamic data I have for there. Okay, so, well, we have something working now. And in fact, we got back 200 okay from our local server. I'll go ahead and add a test, the most complicated test I know. Just kidding. The easiest test I know is, yes, we got a status code 300. So under the test tab, I just inserted a snippet here and I'll hit save. So now I actually have at least one test. The thing I do want to call your attention to, that's the most basic test. Next month, we have a build and test. We'll go much, much deeper into building and testing an API. But one thing is this part here, schema validation. So before, let's go back to our API. Arnaud, you talked about the schema. Did you have a chance to talk about schema validation?
No, but we can.
Okay, so let me make sure the sidebar matches. So I'm here on the final version of our API, and in the very bottom, if you were typing from scratch, you would have noticed every time you pasted, I saw like little X's here, errors. Postman was linting your specification according to the format that you chose here at the top. So according to OpenAPI 3.0 rules, if you had any errors, you would see it here and you could click on it and you can filter, and then you can you would also see a little call out inline. That
and actually, Postman takes advantage of a JSON schema describing the OpenAPI specification to do that.
Yeah, and in this case, Arnaud wrote this flawlessly. I have to fix no errors here, but you would normally see errors and warnings here. This is schema, API schema validation according to JSON schema, according to OpenAPI 3.0, the schema types that you've selected. Now let's go back over to our collection. Remember, and in fact, if you don't remember, let's go over to the tests tab. We created a collection that's now categorized or associated as a test suite. It's called test suite literally, but it's also found under the tests section. And so if I wanted to, now that we have that association, Postman is going to validate the collection, the types of requests and the types of responses that I'm getting back with the schema that we've defined. So if I click on 4 issues, once I send a call, if you haven't sent a call yet, you probably won't see this little badge. And it's kind of jacked up because I'm zoomed in really hard. But if I click on it, you can see here's what Postman is screaming at me for. So it's actually reading the OpenAPI specification and saying, you said it should be an integer. It's totally not an integer. And that's because I'm returning the hard-coded example responses. But once I build out my whole backend, once I hook up my database, this is going to be enforcing my API consumption along with my schema. So 2 different types of schema validation, and I showed you the collection versus the API schema validation from this little badge here, but you can also look at it from the API here. You can validate it here. So it's a 2-way association. And if I was like, actually, I only wrote 1 test, I don't want it to be a test. You can edit this and you can remove it from the association as a test and then re-add it for a documentation or something.
Yeah, and so you have the same kind of link with collections. You have the collection you have generated from the OpenAPI specification, right?
Yes. So anytime you generate a collection from the API, you've automatically associated that collection. However, if you were to create from scratch a collection, you could still add it as an association. However, then you're not guaranteed that it's going to be syncing right off the bat.
Okay. So, and we can see them in the documentation tab, if I'm correct, right?
So
yeah,
in
collection.
In this case, when I generated it, I selected test, and that's why it's showing under test.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's just the basic. I just wanted to reinforce the idea of the associations. And again, if I had a documentation collection, it would show up here. I created a test suite, so it shows up here, and so on and so forth. I am going to go through a little bit quickly now and pick up the pace. I just want to show you what we have coming in the next 2 Space Camp sessions, the build and test and monitor and deploy. I barely scratched the surface with testing. You saw me insert the most basic test you could possibly imagine. I haven't run anything yet besides 1 request, but once you define your test suite, you can actually run all of the stuff locally in Collection Runner and then see the results of those runs here. Or you can run your tests as part of your CI/CD, and you can hook that up here. And then we're talking through the API producer lifecycle now. So after you build and test, you're going to deploy and monitor. So there's different types of integrations that you can set up, all stemming from your OpenAPI contract. Okay, so I just whipped through a ton of things, and we haven't even had a chance to get in depth in a whole lot of those, but I just wanted to make sure there was a little bit of time at the very end for questions. So I'm going to go back to our recap. So in the session, it was pretty whirlwind towards the end, but hopefully you have a taste of what's coming in the next 2 sessions. Arnaud, you talk through from scratch. You started from scratch, and you have snippets that we can copy and paste just to double check, but I really appreciate that you walk through the OpenAPI specification from scratch, and you told us about your thought process. And even before you opened up the specification, you said the human needs are what matter most. So it's machine readable format, but it's for humans. And so humans are coming up with it. Make sure you address the human needs. Lots of terminology that we threw around. API first, maybe this is the first time you're hearing about it. API first is sometimes synonymously used with design first. And OpenAPI is one of the most popular formats used for design first. Reusable components, those $refs, keeping your code super dry and resilient. We looked at boilerplate code snippets, client-side code gen, server-side code gen. We talked about schema validation for the API, and then also between the API and the collections that you generate from the API. We looked at testing, but there's also documentation and other types of entities that you can generate from an OpenAPI file. We talked very briefly about version control. My GitHub connection errored out, but source control, you can hook up your own Git. And then versioning, Arnaud created v1.0 and in fact outlined several different versions that you can use. Versioning is a very, very deep topic that we'll be covering in a future session. And we could have generated mock servers. In this case, I did server-side code gen. So we're hitting localhost, but you can also spin up a mock server on Postman Cloud and then hit Postman base URL. And then we just took a really quick look through the integrations for the remainder part of the lifecycle, starting with design, but the OpenAPI spec can be used at every part of the lifecycle. So hopefully this is not your last time learning more about API first. We talked about design and mock this time, but again, we have 2 sessions coming up next month and the following month for build and test and monitor and deploy. And a little sneak peek at what's coming up from our product roadmap, specifically related to OpenAPI. Multi-file schema support is coming up. Partner API network. We have the public API network for public APIs, private for private APIs within my own Postman team. And now there's partner API network coming up for our open APIs. I didn't even talk about application performance management integrations, but there's a whole, if you look under that very last tab in the API lifecycle, you can see a ton of integrations, and there's even more coming. And no code, low code flows. It's out, it's in beta. So if you haven't played around with it, it's pretty neat drag and drop ways to run your API flows.
Yeah. This one is very marvelous, really.
It's marvelous.
Yeah.
Soon we will be able to do that in public workspaces so that, people can document them and then share them publicly. Okay, chippity chop, additional resources. The 2 I want to call out here is the second one, OpenAPI map. That one is kind of like a mind map of what an API specification should look like. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so basically, I had a really hard time to understand the description, the documentation of the specification to visualize the structure of OpenAPI documents. So I created this tool that shows the structure of an OpenAPI document as a tree. And you have, for each node, you have description, the difference between version 2, version 3, and you have the direct links to the documentation of the OpenAPI spec. For now, it's only for 2.0 and 3.0. I will add 3.1 later this year. Very nice.
And then the other one I'll call your attention to is the 8-point API lifecycle blueprint. I kind of blew past that blueprint. Blew past the API lifecycle image, but if you haven't really heard about it or you're curious about more, there's a really good blog post by our chief evangelist, Ken Lane, that goes into a little bit more detail. Oh, and here's a plug. Arnaud is the API handyman, and for people who are not in the API ecosystem, you might not even know who that is, but he's a celebrity and has written a book about designing web APIs. So check that out. I'm so sorry. We do not have time for live questions today. However, API Handyman's Twitter handle is on the bottom. If you have questions about API design and OpenAPI, go ahead and tweet at him. If you have questions about Postman, my Twitter handle is down there as well. Go ahead and ask me over Twitter and let's continue the conversation. Let's not wait until next month. And the very last thing is please do, hopefully somebody's dropped a link to this survey in the chat. We have 2 more sessions coming up. This was an introductory one, but next month and the following month are going to be next level. We're going to go deeper into building and testing and deploying and monitoring. So please do provide your feedback. All of us behind the scenes look at this information and we use it to formulate our upcoming sessions. All right, Arnaud. Closing thoughts. Do you have any closing thoughts?
Needs first, OpenAPI second, but API first.
That's so hilarious that you're a super big advocate for OpenAPI and you're like the needs come first. Because what is the point of OpenAPI if you don't satisfy your needs? You might have done everything correctly, but if you just misunderstood or misconstrued what the end consumer wants, then you're building APIs that nobody wants.
Exactly.
Okay. All right. Thank you all so much for joining. Hopefully you can come back next month as we go through some of these concepts a little bit deeper, but thank you.
Thank you. Au revoir.
Au revoir.